folks. How are you doing this afternoon? All right. So we're talking about housing and evictions and fairness and equity, which is in short supply in our country currently, as you know. I was going to just talk for a couple minutes about intersections, the intersection of various factors that give rise to some people being in more precarious circumstances than others. Privileged versus the oppressed, and our previous speaker just alluded to this in a lot of different ways very effectively. Thank you. But it is a problem of injustice, and people are more disadvantaged if they belong to certain categories of society, and if they are multiply oppressed, because not only are they economically oppressed, but they may be racially oppressed, disadvantaged. Gender brings forward disadvantages based on your membership as a woman, a man, a two-spirit, gay, lesbian, etc. But let's talk about housing for a minute. Eviction affects people profoundly because it intersects with other factors and it brings about results. You may only be delaying homelessness when we evict people from their homes. And homelessness and the crushing debt that people have experienced as a result of the epidemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also earlier, the pandemic has only brought more clarity to inequalities in the United States. These were there before, but now we have to face them. Racial inequality, oppression, subordination, gender, and social class inequality. And just to give you a little bit of some statistics, we have to throw some statistics in here. The City of Life, Vita Urbana, an organization in the Boston area, said the crisis, the pandemic, affects people differentially. For example, 40% of black renters in Massachusetts, 2 in 5, had little or no confidence in being able to pay their August rent. 30% of Hispanic renters, nearly 1 in 3, had the same, little or no confidence in being able to pay their August rent. 14% of white renters had a similar confidence rate. So the inability to find rent, which in low-income households typically represents at least 50% of your income, is scarce. And the inability to pay is high. So when the eviction moratorium was ended, people are facing a very drastic consequence. This affects families and individuals, particularly in the context of domestic conflict, of anxiety. People are facing the extraordinary crisis of not having a home. And it affects the whole family with respect to drug abuse, addiction problems, domestic assault, domestic violence, abuse of children. So there is a trickling effect when people are confronted with homelessness. And as I alluded, not all people experience this crisis equally. Black and brown people are disproportionately harmed due to inequalities in healthcare and employment, as you know, and housing is also unequally accessed. This country's legacy of housing discrimination and segregation has led to staggering disparities, particularly when we compare black and brown women with white women. Today, 73% of white families own their own homes, compared to just 41% of black families and 49% of Latinx families. Moreover, only the average wealth of a white family is nearly 10 times that of a black family. As our previous speaker mentioned, this is unconscionable. We have tax opportunities. We can tax these people, but we choose not to. We are making choices as a society, and the effect is the oppression of so many people. Almost 40% of people in the U.S. rent homes, so it's a huge problem in our society, and we've got to do something about it now. Another problem is when people are evicted, it's a legacy that they carry with them. It's like a criminal record. So when you try to get another apartment, if you can find one that's affordable, especially on the Cape, you have the legacy of an eviction and unfair tenant screening policies that, again, particularly impact black women in the U.S. and on the Cape, I'm sure, as well. Just to give you just a little bit of more information, toward the end of July, 1 in 3 Massachusetts records with little or no confidence in paying August rent relied on credit cards and loans, federal stimulus payments, which are no longer available and were dismally low, and unemployment insurance to pay their expenses. 1 in 4 borrowed from family and friends. And when you're not paying your rent for a few months, it doesn't just disappear. Your landlord is expecting that you're going to pay the whole bill when, the pandemic ends, which is absolutely impossible. So we have the compounding effect of lack of jobs, health crises, poverty, inequality, racism. And on the Cape, it's exacerbated. Our housing has become unbelievably more expensive with respect following the pandemic. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry is moving to the Cape so they can because they're working from home, and they can work from home on the Cape. And our housing has become extremely expensive, and rental housing is virtually non-existent. Massachusetts has about a 3.5% vacancy rate of housing, whereas the national average is about 6%, which are both rather low. But it's much lower on the Cape than it is elsewhere, even in Massachusetts. So as we think about this crisis, as was mentioned, our governor can act, the legislature can act. They're still in session after the election. They're going to go back to work. Who knows what they're doing, but they're not doing a lot. But we need to make demands on them. We pay their salaries. They should speak for us. And I hope you'll mobilize on November 4th and keep aware of what's going on. Our country is spiraling downward into a dictatorship. And the allusion to the Holocaust was very appropriate. We have to be watchful, folks. We're in very, very dangerous times. Be safe. And it's a good project. It's a good cause. Let's make sure we get emergency housing for people that face eviction. It's a fundamental human right. Housing is a fundamental human right. Let's act like it is. Thank you. Peace.